the Department of Probation and the difference between the two. And, you know, I definitely want to have this conversation because, you know, I see some youth, I see some young people up here, but I also see a lot of parents. And the one thing about a child's behavior is that a lot of times negative behavior starts at home. And a lot of kids end up in the system because they were either failed by their parents, you know, their parents didn't take good care of them, they were neglected, they were abused, and that's where sometimes problematic behavior starts. It's a trauma response. A lot of kids go through trauma, they come home, they see their parents arguing, you know, they see their parents blacked out, drunk, and things like that. And that's where it all starts. So if we can start in the home, making sure that our children are seeing, you know, healthy relationships, healthy coping skills, healthy interactions, then that gives children a much better chance to be successful in life. Now, the youth who come to us from the Department of Probation are youth sometimes, you know, they come as a result of those things I just spoke about. So they're out there, they're getting into trouble, they're hanging out with other people who might be up to no good. They're hanging out with people who, you know, experience a lot of the same stuff, you know? And so, you know, I definitely want to make sure that that's something that I bring to light because, you know, you know, my mom said one thing one time is that, you know, the parents expect to be respected, but sometimes the parents don't respect their own children. And so that's where it starts. So, I wanted to start with that, but working with youth in the foster care system, you know, to follow up on, you know, what Officer Troy was talking about, you know, after the youth are arrested, they're sent to juvenile hall. When they're in juvenile hall, they're waiting to be sentenced, and the judge will send them to one of three places. And it all depends on what they did to get in trouble. The judge will either send them to camp, you know, like a probation camp, where there's no home visits. You know, it's kind of prison style almost. The judge will either send them there if their crimes are bad enough. You know, if their crimes are, you know, like less violent, you know, things like that, then they'll be sent to what's called suitable placement. And that's where I was working. You know, the youth would come to the placement, and this is where they would learn how to be like rehabilitated. You know, they would learn different ways to respond, you know, to whatever their triggers are. You know, they would, you know, we would send them to, you know, they wouldn't have to go to school like at a probation school or anything like that. They'd be given the opportunity to go to a public school. They'd be given the opportunity to actually have home visits on the weekends, but then, you know, their parents would have to bring them back on Sundays, and they'd have to spend the week with us where, again, they're learning, you know, what proper nutrition looks like. They're learning, you know, how expressing your feelings in a respectful way looks like, and, you know, just other things to, you know, at least try to change the trajectory of their life. And now, one of the things that I did want to talk to, you know, the young folks about, especially you young folks, because you guys are going to end up having to deal with this. You guys are probably dealing with it now. And, you know, all the adults in the room, we've dealt with it. We've all been kids and teenagers, you know, but you guys haven't been adults yet. So there's a lot to learn from the adults in your life. And some of the things that, you know, we recognize that young people deal with is trying to fit in, you know. Kids are willing to almost do anything to fit in, to feel like they belong somewhere, you know? If that means, hey, I'm gonna get in trouble because the people over here, I think they're cool, I'm willing to get in trouble with them because I wanna fit in, they're willing to do that. Some of the other things that, you know, youth experience is, you know, as you get older, you know, young folks, you guys, you know, start looking for romantic relationships. And, you know, one of the things that's important is knowing what a healthy relationship looks like. You know, I know that there was a conversation about domestic violence, and at your age, you know, at any age, love does not include violence. So at no point, you know, should you remain in a relationship where violence is occurring. And so another thing that young people really have to deal with also is drugs. You know, back when I was younger, 20 plus years ago, the main thing that a lot of parents had to be worried about with their kids and drugs was smoking weed. The worst thing you could do was smoke weed. Now young people got worried about smoking weed, they popping perks, they popping pills, they doing all kind of stuff, you know, and that's the type of stuff that can really have detrimental effects on the lives of young people as they're growing into young adults. You know, some of the other things that young people deal with is peer pressure. You know, we just talked about that. You know, just doing whatever it takes. You know, you might be in a situation where you're hanging out with a friend, you know, and they're pressuring you to do something, and you don't want to do it, but you also don't want to, you know, come across as being lame or not being cool. So you try it, and next thing you know, there's people. I work with kids. I work in a field where we hear, unfortunately, about kids overdosing on fentanyl, things like that, you know, and it's all from something that they thought was harmless. Hey, you know, just pop this, you know, always gonna make you feel this way, and then, you know, God forbid, they don't wake up no more, you know, so it really all comes down to just making sure that you are, you know, like surrounding yourself with good people. And so I'm just pulling out my phone right now because, you know, I kind of wrote down exactly what the young folks got to deal with. Another thing that young folks got to deal with that we didn't have to deal with, cyberbullying. You know, back in the day, if somebody got knocked out and you ain't seen it, you never saw it. Now, it's online. People making comments, it's spreading around the school, and, you know, that can cause significant mental health issues. There's people out there, you know, unfortunately harming themselves because they can't deal with the effects of being bullied and feeling judged everywhere they go. Social media. That's another thing we didn't have to deal with growing up. I just turned 40 this year, right? Thank you so much, I appreciate that. So, you know, I turned 40 this year. And, you know, I feel like I've been blessed. You know, I have a decent job, you know, I drive a nice car, I live in a decent neighborhood. But social media makes me feel like I'm not enough. So I can't imagine what it's like being young nowadays when you don't, you know, when you're young, you don't have money, you know, you're not old enough to work. How are you going to get the things you really truly want? You got to depend on your parents. And sometimes, you know, our parents just don't have it. And so, you know, the effect that has on a young person to feel like they don't feel like they are enough because they don't have what everybody else seems to have. It's sad, you know, and I've seen the effects that can have on young people. You know, that makes them want to steal, you know, so that they can get what they think somebody else has. And a lot of times what we see online ain't even real. You know, the chain they got on ain't real. Or it's borrowed, or they standing in front of somebody else's car, but we see what we see and we think that that's real, you know? So that's definitely something that young folks are definitely dealing with. Another thing that I've seen is teen pregnancy. Teen pregnancy, first of all, you know, welcoming a new life is always a blessing. But the hardest time in your life, if you were to raise a child, would be when you are a teenager. Because when you have to just prepare to have a child, everything goes into that. Everything. That means you lose focus with school, you lose focus on your social circle, you just lose focus with everything else. And again, like I just mentioned, when you're young, you don't really have an income stream. You don't have a revenue stream. So now you're raising your child in you know, less than desirable conditions. You know, you can't really provide for your child, and then that contributes to a lot of mental health issues because now you're depressed because you can't be out there with your friends, you can't be out there having a good time, you didn't get a chance to really enjoy your life because you have to dedicate the bulk of your youth to raising children. And then, on top of all that, you gotta go to school and get good grades. So after dealing with all those pressures, you're still expected to go to school and focus and study and get good grades. That's tough, you know, that's tough. And so that's why like, I wanted to come out and talk to you guys, because that's something I see every day with the youth that I work with. You have a question? Sure.
So basically, you're saying that all kids need parents, but not all parents need kids. Is that what you're saying?
That was a great way to put it. All kids need parents, but not all adults need to have kids. You know, so I'm so glad. Yeah, give it up, man. That was. I appreciate that. I'm gonna take that back to work with me, okay? You know, you just gave me a nice little idea. Thank you. All right, everyone in the same color? Right here. Okay. Okay. So yeah, you are absolutely right. You know, and just to piggyback off of that, in this world, we need a license for everything. You need a license to drive. You need a license, you know, for if you want a certain type of job. I know people. You know, some people can do hair like crazy. They need a license to do it. You know, I just got licensed to become a marriage and family therapist. That took forever. Thank you so much. Thank you. That took forever. But the most important role, you don't need a license for, and that's to be a parent. Anyone can have one. Anyone can do it, but not everyone should. You know, so thank you for that. So, ways to stay focused, as you guys. You have a question too?
There's a girl in my class who's always like trying to change her like soul, and I do like everything like what the girls do. And when we like some of our friends like tell her to not like do that, like be yourself and all that.
Thank you so much for that question. So basically, he's saying that there's a girl in his class who appears to be just trying to do whatever she can to fit in, right? She's just trying to do whatever she thinks people would like. And so, you know, unfortunately, you know, I view that as a sign of like low self-esteem, you know, and so it's very important, you know, and this is where the parents come into play. It's very important to pour into your children to make sure that they are good enough just the way they are, you know, build them up, don't let them down, so that way they can feel comfortable being exactly who they are, and they can realize that if people only love you because of what you look like or what you appear to be like, then those aren't real friends for you at all. You know, so I would say, you know, if I were able to talk to that young lady, I would tell her exactly what I just said. Just, you know, be comfortable enough being who you are, and those who are truly meant to be in your life are going to love you regardless. Okay? So, you know, if you get a chance to talk to her, if that's a friend of yours, you know, that might be something you want to tell her, okay? Huh? You said you can't talk to her because she'll tell you to shut up. That brings me to my next point. No, I'm just kidding. So, you know, then, you know, if she's not willing to, you know, listen, or if she's not open to feedback, then that might not be a good friend for you. You know, if she's not willing to be open-minded, you know, then she has to go on her own journey and figure it out someday. You know, I hope she figures it out sooner than later. Okay? But thank you for bringing that up. That's very important. I appreciate it. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys about really quickly is ways you guys can stay focused as you guys are growing up, you know, trying to figure out how to survive in this world as teenagers. You know, the one thing that I can strongly suggest that'll keep people out of trouble is team sports. You know, any type of team sport where, you know, you're surrounded by other like-minded people that want to do well, that want to focus on their grades so that they can continue to play. You're not out there hanging out on the block. That's a great way to stay out the street, because when everybody else is out of school and they on the block up to no good, people who play sports are at practice. You know, they're learning discipline. You know, they're out there, they're away from all the nonsense, and then they really start to build their self-esteem and they start to realize what's really important in life, you know? So another way, if you're not into sports, is after school clubs. So that could be like computer club, anime club, you know, if you like anime and stuff. Just different type of clubs, you know, and your schools will have signs all over the walls that says, come join the club. So that's a good way. Another thing when you get old enough is a part-time job. That's the number one thing that kept me out of trouble. When I was in the 8th grade, I don't know if they still have it, but it was called Clean and Green. My mom will remember that. She used to take me to work every morning. Clean and Green I was 13, you know, and that was before the age that you can really work. But, you know, they allowed you to work. And so that was something that kept me out of trouble. I was able to make some money while we were out of school. Came back to school with the brand new Jordan 14s before they were retro, when they was brand new. Came back to school with the Jordans, now I'm the man. And I ain't have to steal for it, I ain't have to kill for it, you know? All I had to do was go work for it. So that's something that'll keep you out of trouble as well. Another thing that will keep you focused, sorry about that, is hobbies, you know, things that you like to do. If you like to rollerblade, you like to skateboard, you like to do whatever it is you like to do, that's another thing that's gonna keep you out of trouble. And just make sure that you find people who share those interests, and that way you ain't got time for the gang banging, you ain't got time for the dope slanging, you ain't got time for none of that. Another thing is learning life skills. As you guys get older, you guys gotta learn life skills. That's something that we teach our youth every week. We have life skills classes. That's teaching them how to take public transportation. That's teaching them how to cook meals. That's teaching them how to, you know, look for an apartment when they get of age. You know, it's all kinds of different things, because as young folks, you guys cannot rely on your parents forever, and you gotta make sure that, God forbid the worst happens, you're prepared to take care of yourself. So learning life skills is very essential. So where you guys can get resources from. So if you're looking for resources, you know, you guys need any type of help, any type of case management services, you can always research your local social service agency. They would be able to provide like case management, medical case management, things like that, employment services, mental health services, all kind of services, you know, that would be beneficial to the youth and their families. You know, I remember one time, just a quick story, we had a young person in our program, young man. He came to our placement, you know, he got in trouble, he went to juvenile hall, then he came to us, and he had to be with us for at least 6 months before he can go back home. But the thing is, his father lost his job while he was with us. And so, because of that, his father almost lost his housing. And so I spoke to the probation department. I said, look, can you guys help out with rental assistance to help this family? Because what's cheaper for the county? Keeping this young man with us where it's gonna cost you thousands a month, or paying for this father to keep his housing so that you can send this young man back home with his father and connect him with the employment services? And the probation department said, that makes a lot of sense. We're gonna give the father a check, make sure he doesn't lose his housing, make sure he's able to sustain himself when his son comes back home. And that's what they did, you know? So there's definitely resources out there. You just gotta know where to access them. And that's why I say, if you need them, check with your local social services agency, okay? There's also employment programs, you know, like for youth who might be having trouble finding jobs.